India has overtaken the United States, and the world is in shock. For decades, the story was told that America would always be the leader, the untouchable giant, the symbol of progress and power. Yet quietly, steadily, without arrogance but with determination, India has been building. Its people have worked, sacrificed, and endured in the villages, in the cities, in the classrooms, in the fields, and in the laboratories. An unbreakable spirit was shaping something the world could not yet see. And now, what was once unimaginable is now undeniable. The balance of power has shifted. But this is not just about numbers, not only about charts or graphs. This is about human destiny, about a nation of more than 1 billion hearts beating with one dream, one vision: to rise, to stand tall, and to prove that nothing is impossible when hope, discipline, and faith meet together. The world is shocked because the world did not believe. But history has always been written by those who dare to believe when no one else does. There was a time when the very mention of India's economy brought to mind images of poverty, struggle, and endless challenges. Commentators would speak with pity rather than with respect. They would say, yes, India has potential, but it will never catch up. They would measure the nation only by its weaknesses and dismiss its strengths as insignificant. But what they did not understand is that a nation's true wealth is not only in its gold, its oil, or its machines. A nation's wealth is in the hearts of its people, in their resilience, in their relentless hunger to rise beyond circumstances. And this, my friends, has been the story of India. India has been like a river. For years it seemed slow, almost still, underestimated by those who looked only at the surface. But beneath there was movement, there was depth, there was force. And when the barriers began to break, when the world opened its markets, when innovation began to take root, that river became a flood. Today, India is not merely growing, it is surging ahead with a vitality that has stunned the globe. Look at the journey. Not long ago, India was spoken of as a land of call centers, a country known for outsourcing cheap labor. But what do we see now? We see the world's brightest minds, innovators and inventors rising from Indian soil. We see technology hubs in Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Pune that rival Silicon Valley itself. We see satellites launched into space at a fraction of the cost, yet with the same precision and excellence as the giants of aerospace. We see a pharmaceutical industry that supplies the world with affordable medicines, saving countless lives across continents. And yet, the story is not only about industries or corporations, it is about the millions of young men and women who come from humble homes with nothing but determination in their eyes. They study under streetlights, they walk miles to schools, they share books, they endure hardship, and still they rise. They rise because within them there burns a fire that says, we will not be left behind. We will stand shoulder to shoulder with the great nations of the world. India's economy has become the expression of that fire. Year after year, while many advanced nations struggled under debt, stagnation, and division, India pressed forward with growth that surprised even its critics. Factories multiplied, startups turned into global giants, farmers embraced new methods and doubled their yields. Infrastructure projects stitched together cities and villages, giving hope to places that had long been forgotten. It was as though the sleeping giant had awoken, not with noise, not with arrogance, but with the quiet power of steady, unstoppable progress. But what makes this rise truly remarkable is not just the numbers. Yes, India now stands taller in GDP, in manufacturing output, in technological reach. Yes, the stock markets and investment flows testify to its newfound strength. But behind those numbers are human stories, stories of sacrifice, of tears, of perseverance. A mother who skips meals so her child can go to school, a father who works 2 jobs so his daughter can have an education, a young student who studies by candlelight and later becomes a scientist designing satellites that touch the stars. These are the real engines of India's economy. This is the true capital of the nation, the courage and faith of its people. And let us not forget forget the vastness of India itself, a billion voices, a billion dreams, converging into one national aspiration. Every language, every culture, every state, different in expression, but united in spirit. From the fishermen on the coasts to the farmers in the fields, from the engineers in crowded offices to the artisans in small workshops, each has contributed to this rise. The story of India's economy is not written in the offices of the wealthy alone. It is carved into the lives of the ordinary who refuse to give up. Now the world stares in disbelief. How did this happen? How did a nation once colonized, impoverished, and dismissed now rise to surpass the might of America? The answer is both simple and profound. It happened because India believed in itself when others did not. It happened because a people carried within them a vision greater than their pain. It happened because they understood that history is not destiny and that weakness is not permanent. Today, when the global community sees India overtaking the United States, they do not only see charts and graphs shifting. They see a moment that shakes the very narrative of the modern era. For so long, it was taught that only the West could lead, that only America could define the future. But India has proven that leadership can emerge from the East, that greatness can come from struggle, that power can rise from humility. This is why the world is shocked, not because India has wealth that is visible, not because India has technology that is measurable, but because India has defied expectation. It has broken the old story and written a new one. And this new story says, no nation is too weak to rise, no people are too broken to rebuild, no dream is too impossible to achieve. The rise of India's economic power is not just a victory for India. It is a message to the world that the future belongs not to those who inherit privilege, but to those who create it through sacrifice and faith. And in this moment, the heart of humanity is stirred, because in India's journey, we see our own possibility, our own hope, our own chance to rise above what the world says we cannot become. There was a time when America was not just a country but an idea. It was spoken of as the land of limitless opportunity, the shining city on a hill, the leader that would forever guide the world. Its industry set the pace, its universities shaped the brightest minds, its military power made it untouchable, and its culture spread into every corner of the globe. For more than a century, the United States stood as the measure of greatness. Yet today, as the world watches India surpass it, the painful truth is revealed. The American dominance that once seemed eternal is now in decline. The decline did not come in one day nor from one single cause. It came slowly, almost invisibly at first, like a small crack in a mighty wall. For decades, America enjoyed prosperity, but prosperity gave birth to complacency. Innovation began to slow. Industries that once defined the nation started to move overseas, and the factories that had been symbols of pride stood silent and abandoned. Communities that were built on work, discipline, and family saw jobs vanish, and with them went dignity and hope. At the same time, the nation's debt grew like a shadow stretching across its future. Trillions upon trillions were borrowed, not for building, but for maintaining, not for creating, but for consuming. The country that once preached self-reliance became dependent on the very nations it had once dismissed. The strength of a nation is not only in its military or wealth, but in the unity of its people. And here too, America began to falter. Divisions deepened, trust between communities weakened, politics became more about anger than about vision. The world watched not with respect but with concern, as the nation that had once brought others together now seemed unable to bring its own citizens into harmony. The decline of American dominance can also be seen in education and innovation. Once, its universities were unmatched, attracting the best minds from across the globe. But slowly, costs rose beyond the reach of ordinary families, while the quality of education fell under the weight of bureaucracy and confusion. Research that once broke barriers began to be overtaken by new centers of excellence in Asia. Where America once led the space race, it now relies on partnerships to keep pace with nations it had once seen as followers. The arrogance of believing leadership was guaranteed blinded it to the reality that leadership must always be earned anew. And then there is the question of values. America once inspired not just by power, but by example. It claimed to stand for freedom, fairness, and justice. Yet over time, the world saw contradictions. Wars fought in distant lands weakened its moral authority. Promises of opportunity within its borders rang hollow to communities still trapped in poverty. The very ideals that made America admired began to be questioned, not only by others, but by its own citizens. The world could no longer look to America as the unquestioned model because America itself was struggling to believe in its story. The most painful truth of all is that the decline was not inevitable. It was a choice. It was the result of taking greatness for granted. While other nations struggled and sacrificed, America enjoyed comfort and assumed it would last forever. While others invested in infrastructure, in technology, in discipline, America allowed its roads to crumble, its systems to stagnate, and its willpower to weaken. While others looked outward with hunger and hope, America looked inward with entitlement. And so the gap closed, not because America was destroyed, but because it forgot the very principles that once made it great. Now, as India rises and overtakes, the shock is not only about India's strength, but about America's weakness. The world sees a nation that was once the leader of leaders, now hesitant and uncertain. It sees a superpower still strong in name, but fragile in reality. It sees a country where wealth exists, but is unevenly shared, where technology dazzles, but is not enough to hold the world's respect, where military might remains but no longer commands the same moral authority. This moment is a mirror, both for America and for the world. It shows that dominance is not destiny. It shows that no matter how high a nation rises, if it loses its discipline, if it loses its unity, if it loses its sense of purpose, it will fall behind. America, with all its resources, with all its history, is still powerful. But power without vision is like a lamp without oil. It shines for a moment and then fades into darkness. And so the decline of American dominance is not merely a political or economic shift. It is a human tragedy. It is the story of millions who feel left behind, of families struggling in the shadows of abandoned factories, of students burdened with debts they cannot repay, of citizens losing faith in the very dream that once defined them. It is the story of a giant that still breathes but no longer inspires. The world is shocked, not only because India has risen, but because America has stumbled. And in that shock lies a lesson for all nations. Never take greatness for granted. Never assume that today's strength guarantees tomorrow's leadership. For history honors not the complacent, but the vigilant, not the comfortable, but the courageous. When the news broke that India had overtaken the United States, the first reaction around the world was disbelief. For many, it felt impossible. For generations, people had grown accustomed to a world where America was always first. It was a fact of life, a certainty, as stable as the rising of the sun. And yet, in one moment, that certainty was shattered. In capitals across the globe, leaders paused, citizens whispered, and markets trembled. The world was forced to confront a new reality. The balance of power had shifted, and the center of gravity had moved east. In Europe, the shock was almost painful. For centuries, Europe had walked closely with America, sharing values, trading deeply, and relying on its leadership. To see America fall behind stirred questions about the very foundation of the Western order. Could Europe still look across the Atlantic for guidance? Could it still count on America as the unchallenged leader of the free world? Or would it now have to turn toward Asia, not as a distant partner, but as the new leader of progress? The silence in European parliaments and the nervous discussions among policymakers alleged just how unprepared they were for such a reversal. In Asia, the reaction was mixed. Some nations celebrated openly, feeling that history had finally corrected itself. For too long, Asia was seen as the follower, as the factory of the world, but never the leader. Now, India's rise symbolized more than national success. It symbolized the awakening of an entire continent. In China, the rise of India was watched with both admiration and unease. Admiration because here was another Asian giant proving that global leadership was no longer the monopoly of the West. Unease because rivalry was inevitable. The balance of power within Asia itself would now be tested. Neighbors looked at India with newfound respect, but also with careful caution, for they knew that this shift would redefine alliances, trade, and influence across the region. In Africa, there was something deeper than shock. There was hope. For decades, African nations had been told to copy Western models, to follow Western prescriptions. But many of those promises had left them disappointed. Now they looked at India, a country that had once struggled under colonization, poverty, and division, yet had risen through its own strength. To the leaders and people of Africa, India's success was not only news, it was inspiration. It told them that no matter how deep the scars of history, no matter how heavy the weight of poverty, a nation can rise if its people refuse to bow down. In the Middle East, the shock came with calculation. These were nations that had long tied their futures to America through trade, military partnerships, and political reliance. To see America's position slip brought uncertainty. Should they continue to bind themselves to a fading power or begin to seek deeper ties with a rising one? The oil-rich kingdoms, the conflict-torn states, the reforming societies, all were forced to ask, what does India's rise mean for us, and where should our loyalty now turn? But perhaps the most powerful shock was not in governments, but in the hearts of ordinary people across the world. In homes, in workplaces, in schools, people began to talk. Children who once dreamed only of studying in America now wondered about studying in India. Entrepreneurs who once saw America as the ultimate market began to look eastward. Young people from nations across the globe looked at India's story and saw a lesson. That greatness is not reserved for the privileged few, but can be claimed by anyone, anywhere, if they are willing to sacrifice and to persevere. Markets responded with waves of uncertainty. Investors scrambled, companies restructured, and currencies fluctuated. For years, the global economy had depended on America as the anchor, but suddenly that anchor looked weaker, and the currents of trade began to shift toward India. Some feared instability, others saw opportunity. What was clear to all was that the world could no longer be arranged around the assumption of American dominance. A new order was emerging, and everyone had to adjust. This shock also reached cultural levels. For so long, American culture, its films, its music, its brands, dominated the global imagination. But now, people began to look with new curiosity toward India. Its cinema, its traditions, its innovations started to shine with greater intensity. The world's eyes turned to Indian voices, Indian leadership, Indian creativity. It was as though the cultural heartbeat of the globe was shifting, no longer echoing only from the West, but resonating from the East. For some, this change was terrifying. Old powers feared the loss of influence. Old institutions questioned their relevance. Old alliances trembled. But for others, it was exhilarating. Nations that had always stood in the shadows now felt the sunlight of possibility. Young people around the world whispered to themselves, if India can do this, so can we. And yet, behind the shock was also humility. The world realized how fragile dominance truly is. For decades, America seemed invincible, yet its fall behind India showed that nothing is permanent. Every nation, no matter how strong, must guard against pride, must nurture discipline, must listen to the voices of its people. The rise of India and the shock it brought was not just a geopolitical event. It was a lesson written into the heart of history. The shockwave was real. It was not just about numbers. It was about the breaking of an illusion. The illusion that America would always lead. The illusion that Asia would always follow. The illusion that the world's order was fixed forever. When those illusions shattered, the world stood stunned, staring at a reality it had never dared to imagine. And in that silence, one truth became clear. The future would no longer be written in one language, led by one nation, or shaped by one culture. The future would be shared, and in that sharing, the destiny of humanity would find a new voice. The world today stands at the threshold of a new chapter. For more than a century, global leadership meant looking westward, waiting for America to act, and then adjusting to its decisions. Nations were accustomed to a single voice, guiding the course of history, a single hand steering the ship of the world. But now that moment has ended. India has stepped forward, not with arrogance, not with thunder, but with a quiet, steady confidence that has captured the attention of the world. What we are witnessing is not only the rise of one nation, but the dawn of a new form of global leadership. Leadership today is no longer defined by military might alone. It is no longer about how many warships sail the seas or how many weapons are stored in silos. Leadership now is measured by something greater, the ability to inspire, to unite, to create opportunity for billions across borders and cultures. And India's rise has come at precisely the time when the world is hungry for that kind of leadership. In an age of division, conflict, and mistrust, India offers a model that leadership can emerge from humility, from resilience, and from the power of ordinary people determined to change their destiny. The new dawn of leadership is visible in India's ability to balance tradition and modernity. Unlike many powers of the past, India has not abandoned its roots in its pursuit of progress. It has built technology while holding on to spirituality. It has grown in science while cherishing its culture. It has expanded its economy while still carrying the stories and values of its villagers. This balance has given the world something it has long been missing, a reminder that leadership is not about abandoning identity for power, but about drawing strength from identity to serve humanity. And what makes this leadership powerful is not just its reach, but its inclusiveness. For the first time, smaller nations see a leader that understands their struggles. India knows what it means to fight poverty, to overcome colonization, to carry the burden of division and still move forward. That memory is fresh, alive in the hearts of its people, and it gives India a unique place in the world. It leads not from a throne high above, but from a shared ground, reminding the global community that greatness is not about domination, but about lifting others alongside oneself. This new dawn has unsettled many who cling to the old order. They ask, can India truly lead? Does it have the strength, the experience, the resources? But these questions miss the deeper truth. Leadership is not about perfection. It is about vision. It is about direction. It is about believing in possibilities that others cannot yet see. India carries that vision now, a vision not only for itself, but for a future where leadership is shared, where power is not concentrated but distributed, where the voices of the many are heard alongside the voices of the few. The significance of this moment cannot be overstated. For a child in Africa, the rise of India means a new source of inspiration. For a struggling nation in Latin America, it means proof that destiny is not bound by history. For countries in Asia, it means they no longer have to live in the shadow of distant powers. They can walk together with one of their own at the forefront. And for the people of India themselves, this new dawn is not only a victory but a responsibility. They know that to lead the world is not to enjoy privilege but to bear a burden, to stand as an example, and to serve as a light when others are in darkness. There's a deep emotion that runs through this transformation. It is the emotion of justice delayed but not denied. For centuries, India gave the world knowledge, philosophy, and trade, but then endured centuries of exploitation and silence. Now, at last, it rises again, not as a conqueror, not as an empire, but as a leader born from struggle. That is why the world is moved. That is why this moment feels historic. It is not just numbers on a graph. It is the triumph of human perseverance over doubt, of faith over cynicism, of resilience over despair. The dawn of this new leadership also calls every nation to reflect. If India can rise, then what excuse remains for others who say they cannot? If India, with all its challenges, can carry 1 billion people into the future, then what reason remains for any nation to hide behind weakness? This moment is a challenge to the world, to rise, to believe, to create, to lead. Because leadership is no longer a privilege of geography or wealth, it is an invitation to all who dare to dream. My friends, history is not written by chance, it is written by courage. We have seen the rise of India, we have seen the decline of America, we have seen the shock waves move across the world, and now we stand in the glow of a new dawn of leadership. But this moment is not only for governments or leaders, it is for you, for me, for every citizen who dares to dream beyond limitation. The lesson of this hour is clear. No nation is too weak to rise, no dream is too distant to achieve, no challenge too great to overcome. India has shown us that when people believe in themselves, when they endure hardship with faith, when they turn pain into strength, the impossible becomes reality.